And welcome to a completely deadpan edition of Ben's Junk. The only time you will ever hear dead and Ben's junk in the same sentence. Anyway, this is one of those occasional videos I do that'll probably scare off 90% of my regular viewers because, you know, I had the nerve to deviate from the usual stuff I cover. But regardless, by the time this video drops, it'll be a few days past the 125th anniversary of comedian filmmaker Buster Keaton's birth. Keaton being probably my favorite actor and comic and possibly filmmaker ever. Maybe not a big influence on my own work, but a big favorite of mine. And of course, I don't think this is going to help my reputation as being someone who's just a little out of touch with the modern world, but whatever. So this is admittedly going to be a bit on the rambly side, even by my standards. So just consider this an informal chat with crazy old Uncle Benny here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell a couple of stories and give, if the mood strikes, the odd little off-the-cuff mini-review of some of the movies. But let's start with those stories. So I think most folks have that movie or album, or maybe both, that they've managed to purchase time and again over the years. They've worn out copies, damaged them, lost them, given them away, bought them over multiple formats, and so on and so forth. Well, my movie of that ilk is kind of unintentional. Mine is The Cameraman from 1928, which was Keaton's first film for MGM, and it's usually considered to be his last great film. But I've managed to accrue 5 copies of this thing over the years, and they're all stacked up here. So let's get into that. So back when I was in middle school, for whatever strange reason, I just got into silent movies. And at the time, the best way for me to catch them was once in a while AMC, of all channels, knowing what they are now, would run a silent film on some off night, you know, like Tuesday morning at 3:30, something like that. And I would, of course, record it. And then my family got TCM, Turner Classic Movies, in, I think, 99. And, of course, they had and still have Silent Sunday Night. So I recorded a whole lot of those. But very quickly, my favorite became Buster Keaton. And whenever any of his movies came on, even if it wasn't one of his silents, I would dutifully record it. And this is that recording, that initial recording of it. So at the time, I would usually add 5 to 10 minutes of extra time on both ends of the recording, just in case it started early or ran late. And so thanks to that, I think I've been able to pinpoint the date on this one. I'm not positive, but I think I recorded this on Sunday, February 10th, 2002. But yeah, this is that original recording, and yeah, I also did the Poseidon Adventure at some point. This is the actual recording. I have never taped over it. Obviously, I wouldn't have been able to track down the date otherwise. But I just fell in love with the movie immediately, and so I wanted to buy a copy, certainly better than my... I always recorded in EP mode back then to cut down on tape costs. But I wanted a real copy of it. And of course, it being a major studio movie, still under copyright, I figured it was probably out at some point, and the quality would be way better than what I taped off air. And I went online, looked it up, and found that it had been on VHS and Laserdisc. Now, at the time, I didn't have a Laserdisc player yet, so I found, and the VHS had fallen out of print, but I was able to find a cheap copy of it online, and thanks to the magic of my dad's credit card, I was able to pick it up. And there it is. So, talk about disappointment. I figured, well, you know, as I said, it's a major studio movie and all the quality is going to be pretty dang good. I mean, as good as it's going to get for VHS anyway. But, oh, my heart sank when I put this in. The quality, I had a handful of those $1.99 bargain bin VHS tapes at the time too, public domain stuff. And the quality here was worse than a lot of those. But the print that's on here is sourced from a Lord knows what generation 16mm copy. And what the deal is with that is this film was actually considered lost for a long time. But I think sometime in the mid-60s, late 60s, somebody over in Europe found an intact 16mm copy, which was the source for this. And that became the standard bearer for 20-odd years. Now, in 1991, somebody found a mostly complete 35mm copy and a seemingly original copy. And so that eventually became the standard bearer. But this had to have been just before that discovery was made and that restoration was done. But given my abject disappointment, I wound up reverting to the TCM copy, which was actually way better. And I'll explain that a little more in a bit. But fast forward to 2004, and it came out on DVD as part of this 3-movie set, Keaton's first 3 for MGM, from the long-defunct TCM Archives line. And it was the right print. It was a good print, although parts of it out of necessity still had to be sourced from the 16mm. But the score had been replaced. Now, 1928, talkies were, becoming a thing, and sound films were coming out per se, but a lot of them were still silent movies, but now they had scores attached to them, musical scores, so the theater didn't have to worry about making their own. So what they did for this one was they had Arthur Barrow write and record a score for it, and he was in Frank Zappa's band for a while. And you'd think for that reason I would like it, but I just thought it clashed really bad with the movie. Now, by this point I had a Laserdisc player, but prior to the DVD coming out, the price on the collector's market for this was just crazy. I think you were looking in upwards of $100 for a copy. But once the DVD came out, and it had been out for a little while, at least a few months, I saw the price come way down on Fleabay, and I think I paid like $10 for this. But this is apparently what TCM had been using on that off-air copy, because it's the first restoration, the first decent one, and it had the original canned score to it. And it's not a great score or anything, but at least it's appropriate. And this is a twofer, so you have his follow-up film, Spite Marriage, which is a perfectly okay movie. It's not a great one or anything, but it's worth seeing if you're into Keaton. So the odd thing about this set is you would think it had to be a 2 Laserdisc set. You'd think one movie would be on one disc and the other would be on a second disc. No, you have most of the Cameraman on side 1, the rest of the Cameraman on side 2, and the first chunk of Spite Marriage still on side 2, and then the rest of Spite Marriage on 3, and side 4 is a dead side. So I've run into that a few times with these MGM Laserdiscs. Cutting costs, I guess. But anyway, between this and the DVD, that kind of became it for me for 15 years, I guess. And so this summer, it came out on Blu-ray, part of the Criterion collection. And Spite Marriage is still on here. It's just now a glorified bonus feature. And there's still parts of it that are sourced from 16 millimeter, but it's the best looking I've ever seen this movie, and it's a lot less jarring in those transitions from 35 to 16 and back again. Now, the original kind of canned, tinny score is nowhere to be found, but this has a new score and a much more appropriate one, so I'm totally okay with this. But yeah, that's my story of that one. I've told this story before, but given the occasion, I guess I'll do it again, though I'll try and slim it down a little here. So, Buster Keaton was the impetus behind my buying my first Laserdisc player in early 2003. I've said 2002 in the past, but I've recently come to the conclusion that it had to have been early 03. But anyway, by that point, I had picked up a couple of Keaton DVDs, but the cost of those things was so high, you know, for the good restored versions, and just good DVDs in general were 30, 40 bucks at the time. So with that going on, I set my sights on this massive box set that Kino had out, which rounded up all of Keaton's shorts and features from his first solo effort in 1920 up through early 1928. So everything up to, but not including, the Cameraman. So Cameraman notwithstanding, all the big ones, the ones that he's remembered for now. But this big DVD set was somewhere in the $300 range at the time. And that was still a lot less than buying them individually, which would have been closer to $400. But so I started saving up for that set. But spending that much on DVDs seemed a little crazy. And so I started looking for alternatives, and I went lurking around Fleabay, and I found that this set, save for a DVD-only rarities disc, had already been on Laserdisc, spread out over a 3-volume set. And Laserdisc had just been discontinued here in the States in 2002. And so it was in that technological kind of week-old newspaper territory, you know, too new to be retro, but too old to be cutting edge and hip and fashionable and all that. So I found that for about half the price of the DVD box, I could Fleabay with shipping a Laserdisc player and the 3 volumes of the set. And I could just buy the rarities disc on DVD separately, which had been released as a standalone disc in 2001. But anyway, the top 3 boxes here are that original 1995 set. And we'll see how my camera reacts to this. But Volume 1 here is the only one that I bought used. For whatever reason, you could still get new old stock of Volume 1 here, but they were really expensive. But 2 and 3 were just comparatively dirt cheap, so I had to settle for a used Volume 1, and I think I've added a bit to the damage that this thing has taken over the years. But anyway, like I said, we'll see how my camera reacts to trying to hold this up. The goofy thing about these sets is that the features are all in chronological order, but between each feature you get 1 or 2 of Keaton's shorts from earlier on, so it's not really quite chronological. It's only half chronological. But anyway, highlights from this set for me, even though a lot of Keaton fans don't like it, his first film, and I use the term kind of loosely, the Saphead, because he was just a star. It wasn't really his show yet. He was just more an actor, a hired gun. And it's a spoiled rich kid story. It's about a young guy trying to just find his individual place, you know. But I like it better than it's given credit for, and he does get in some good gags here. You can tell when he was kind of doing the writing here. Aside from that, one of the shorts here, 1 week, Keaton gets married, and for a wedding present, they get a house, a prefab house that they have to build themselves. And they do, and everything that can go wrong does go wrong, and I'll leave it at that. I'm sure this one's public domain, so you can probably find it on YouTube, but I won't give away the ending of that one. And then, aside from that, Our Hospitality, which is kind of a spoof of the Hatfields and McCoys kind of Family Feud thing. Those deals where somebody's great-great-grandfather hated somebody else's great-great-grandfather, and it's just been passed down to the point where you got two factions that hate each other, but they don't know why. And it's, Keaton coming in and falling in love with a member of the opposing clan, and the youngins are a little too far removed to know about the whatever ancient dispute between the families, and it goes from there. And there's some really good and very dangerous stunts in that one. And speaking of stunts, Sherlock Jr., which is only 45 minutes, but he accomplishes a lot in there. Most of it is a dream sequence, so that gave him license to do some really out there gags. You'd have to see it. It involves him. He's a movie projectionist, falls asleep on the job, dreams he can just walk right into the movie, and he can do these insane stunts and some really, really ahead of its time effects in this thing, to the point where I'm not sure we've really decoded what he was doing quite yet, and that was 1924. But anyway, Volume 2 here. So the highlights from this one for me would be the boat. It's a short. Keaton and his family live on not even really a houseboat. They're just kind of stuck on this little boat, and it's another case of everything that can go wrong does go wrong. And the boat is called the Damfino, and of course that's the name of Keaton's fan club now. The Navigator, which is one of his most famous ones, and it's a good one. He gets stranded at sea, almost alone on a big ocean liner. Seven Chances is a definite favorite of mine. I've seen a lot of people that don't like it, because it's a very basic story, and it's a very, very contrived story. Basically, guy must get married by the evening of his 27th birthday, otherwise he doesn't get this multi-million-dollar inheritance. But it's not the plot that makes it, it's the gags. And probably the entire second half of it is just a very, very big chase sequence, which just gets bigger and more absurd as it goes along, and more dangerous to boot. And I should note, I was going to cover this when I did early color film recently, but I decided not to cover Technicolor because it was just getting to be too much material. The opening sequence to Seven Chances is in 2-strip Technicolor, and it's pretty much just orange here, but I'll revisit that in a bit. Otherwise, I'll be honest, I've never cared for Go West, which is... as far as I can tell, it's a Charlie Chaplin parody, but he's going a little too far into making fun of Chaplin's tendency towards pathos, and it just doesn't really work in my opinion. The Haunted House isn't quite what you would think. It's more about bank robbers, but it's a very good one. And of course, Keaton was a very mechanically minded person, so what you would think is a haunted house is not necessarily what it seems, but I guess that was a catchier title. All right, finally, Volume 3 here. So The General, which has got to be his most famous film, and a film that I did not particularly like the first time I saw it, but the second time I saw it, I just flipped. I thought it was brilliant. And I'm guessing that's what happened when it first came out. As far as I know, it's the only one of his movies that lost money. because you kind of have to get yourself into that headspace. It's not a normal comedy. Most of it is Keaton. This takes place during the Civil War, and Keaton's a railroad engineer, and he's not in the service, but he's Confederate. His train gets stolen by some Union soldiers, and he manages to get it back, and then it's an issue of him trying to run this big old train by himself and all the problems he encounters. And there's a very famous shot that's been used as stock footage a million times of a train trying to cross a burning bridge and doesn't quite make it. And my understanding is the train wreckage stayed there until like the 70s or 80s. I'd have to look that up again. But yeah, it's one of those movies that doesn't make a whole lot of sense the first time, but you see it again and it's just like, oh, wow. The Playhouse is probably my favorite of his shorts. So the first half of it's a dream sequence, and he dreams that he is literally the whole show in this vaudeville house. And he is playing all the characters, and it's all camera trickery, but you can kind of see the slices of where they were exposing and not exposing the film, but it's still very well done. And there's some parts where he does little dances, and he does manage to stay in sync with himself. So it's impressive. And of course, they had no way of finding out if they succeeded or not until they developed the film. Cops, probably his most famous short. I started writing a score for that after my unintentional last album, and I got about 5 minutes into it, and I never finished it, never recorded it. Damned if I could remember it now. Oh well. College, which is, to me, came off as a parody of Harold Lloyd's The Freshman. Harold Lloyd plays a college student, and he's a big-time go-getter, and college, in Keaton's case, is he's trying to, win the girl and show what a great athlete he is and all, but it comes to, I guess, slightly more sour ends, although it all ends well, of course. And Steamboat Bill Jr., which is wonderful, and is best remembered now for a hurricane sequence in which the entire front of a house just flops over and Keaton's standing in front of it, but he's standing in just a way that there's an open window in the house, and when it lands, it just passes through him. So had he been just a little off in that, he would have been killed instantly. So I understand he had some major personal and marital problems at the time, and that was probably the only reason he did that. But anyway, that's it for that big old set. Now, his talkies for MGM from 1930 to 33 get a lot of flack. And I have been going back and kind of rewatching this in fits and starts over the last several months, and I'm hard-pressed to disagree. I mean, there's little moments here and there, but none of the movies really hold together, and the jokes are, for the most part, pretty bad. And the first couple, Free and Easy and Doughboys, are more musicals almost than anything else. Then after that, MGM decided to pair him up with Jimmy Durante, and I like Jimmy Durante, but their styles clash so bad. So to me, it's like, two great flavors that don't go together. It's like chocolate syrup on a steak or something. It's just two things that shouldn't ever cross paths. But I picked this up for maybe $10 or so a while back, and these are, I think, all on the Warner Archive DVD-R line now, but if you happen to have a Laserdisc player, I'm sure you could get this way cheaper than the DVD-Rs, and they're really not that good. I'd say they're kind of for completists only. And I should note here that Keaton did a bunch of films for shorts, for Educational, which was not an educational film company at all, and for Columbia. And I actually don't have any of those. They've been on DVD now, but I've seen most of them, and I just didn't like them. And it's one of those things that, well, you know, if I find it at the right price, I'll pick it up, but it's not really a priority. But moving all the way to the very end, we've got this set of The Railrodder and Buster Keaton Rides Again. And The Railrodder is a short film made for the Tourism Board of Canada. And it's basically come see Canada, take a train ride across Canada and see the countryside and all that. And it's a return to silent film for him. This was 1964 or 5. I think it was made in 64, released in 65. And he's kind of recycling a lot of his old bits, but it is kind of nice to watch, and he still does it about as well as you could hope for for a guy in his late 60s. And to me, the real gem here, though, is the Buster Keaton Rides Again film, which is a documentary about the making, half a documentary about the making of the Railrodder, and half kind of biography. But it's nice to see because it's really the only time you ever get to see Keaton doing his thing and coming up with gags and executing them and arguing with crew members and stuff. Yes, we can do this, or this is how this needs to happen. So it's great to see. And you also get to see him, because they had to do the Railrodder actually going across Canada, they made all these little publicity stops along the way, and you get to see some of those, and him meeting local politicians and such. And probably the most surprising part is him encountering kids periodically, like, you know, 8 to 10-year-old kids who've seen his films on TV, and they're just crazy about the guy. So it's a good one to see. It's been on DVD, but I just don't think it's in print anymore, and I think it fetches some pretty good money, unfortunately. But maybe it's on YouTube or something, or Amazon Prime. And lastly, for the Laserdiscs, a documentary from 1987, I believe. Buster Keaton, A Hard Act to Follow, which aired in 3 episodes. I think in the States this aired on PBS. But unfortunately, first I should note that Kevin Brownlow and David Gill did this, and so 2 of the big guys of silent film history, and kind of just film history in general. And it's a very well done documentary, but this version that made it to home video is a work print. So when an interview is going on, unless you really know your people from this period and you know what they looked like by much later in their lives, you don't know who's talking, because the part where their name would come on screen hadn't been done yet. So this has been on DVD in Europe, but from what I've heard, it is still the same unfinished work print. I have seen the finished one on TCM, but that was when I was in high school, and I didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't tape it. Back then, TCM used to run documentaries on Friday afternoons, and that's how I saw that. And I also saw, speaking of Kevin Brownlow, Hollywood, a very famous multi-part documentary that can't seem to get reissued because of legal issues. Parts of it are on Amazon Prime, Hollywood, that is. But, yeah. And I should note that this Laserdisc actually rounds up all 3 episodes. The VHS version, you had to buy 3 different tapes. All right, here is the final stack for today. And the first 2 DVDs on this stack are those first 2 Keaton DVDs I bought back in the early 2000s. Now, the one at the top of the stack here is very near and dear to me. First off, it was the first Kino DVD I'd ever bought. I had a couple of their VHS tapes by then, but no DVDs. It was, I guess, tied for most expensive DVD I'd ever bought at the time, tying with my Criterion copy of This Is Spinal Tap, which I think would have been $35. And I also bought this the day before I started high school. So I was, on the one hand, nervous about starting high school, but on the other, pretty excited about this. And I must have watched this, I don't know how many times. But this is what I was using when I was trying to come up with my unfinished score to Cops that I never bothered to record and don't think I could ever remember if my life depended on it. But yeah, this is the one that started it all. And of course, this was, you know, pretty early on in DVD's run, so it's still the snap case here. And I'm amazed it hasn't fallen apart on me yet. But, and this was still early on enough that you'd have stuff like this in there, in this case, talking about the different audio formats that could be on DVD. Of course, with the internet that much more common today, you could just quick look it up if you wanted to. But at the time, yeah, I remember getting this kind of stuff in DVDs back then. And I've still got a lot of DVDs in these old snap cases. So, this is the second one I picked up, which I guess had to have been 2001. It's a twofer of Our Hospitality and Sherlock Jr., both of which I've already discussed. Unfortunately, there's no special stuff in this one. The keep case is starting to go on me, though, snap case. And I had the laser discs already by the time I found this one, but I don't remember where I found it, but it was, I'm pretty sure, used, and the price was right. And of course, DVD must be better than laser discs, so I picked it up. If nothing else, DVD is more convenient. And yeah, the laser discs were very well done, but yeah, it's the same, if not slightly better. And this rounds up all of Keaton's nautical stuff. So you've got the Navigator plus his two boat-themed shorts. Now, I mentioned earlier that the big Kino DVD box set had an, at the time of its initial release, exclusive disc of rarities. In 2001, it got issued on its own. And this is it. And so this is, as the name would kind of imply, and as the description says, it's TV commercials that Keaton was doing later in life. And the real attraction here for collectors is the complete version of one of his shorts, Hard Luck, which at the time of certainly the Laserdisc, the last minute or two of the film was missing, which was the punchline of the whole movie. And Keaton claimed for the rest of his life that it was the biggest laugh he ever got. I don't know how true that is. It's a good gag. I wouldn't say it's, you know, a real jaw dropper, but some youngins might be slightly offended by it. But it involves Keaton getting hit so hard that he goes down into the earth and comes out the other side, on the other side of the world, and comes out in the appropriate garb of the country he comes out in. Not meant to be offensive or anything. But otherwise, yeah, it has his turn on This Is Your Life, which is a bit of an awkward watch. But it is well done. But yeah, it's more for diehards only. So before Keaton started flying solo, he was making shorts with Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. And yeah, Keaton is smiling there. So they did, I think, about 24 shorts together over the span of about 3 years. And Keaton fought in World War I, so he got pulled away for that. And just, it reached a point where they kind of had to go their separate ways. And I guess it's a good thing they did, because Roscoe's career got pretty well destroyed in scandal just a short time after. But anyway, this rounds up most of what survives of what they did together. And it's really just a bunch of stuff from Black Hawk Films. I mean, some of this looks like it was sourced from those old Super 8mm films they used to sell back in the 60s and 70s. But The films, for the most part, are okay. They're not as sophisticated as Keaton's later stuff, but certainly if you're a fan, they're worth seeing. Now, this Arbuckle Keaton set rounds up the stuff that wasn't on that other set. That's why I've got it. So I forget what the unique short is here, but it's the only reason for me to have this. Otherwise it's just redundant. And it's still got the little wrapper that I got it in and the little sticker and all. But yeah, I haven't watched any of these in ages, and I remember liking them well enough, but I don't know, there aren't enough hours in the day to revisit it, I guess. So this set was put together by Paul Garucki, who's a big-time film historian, and somebody who I'm now Facebook friends with. But as the name would imply here, Keaton, for the most part, spent his later years doing TV commercials and making industrial films. And this rounds up, I don't think everything, but as much as possible. And the real attraction here is those industrial films. There's one that he did for Kodak that's actually pretty good. And otherwise, it just kind of reissues some of the public domain stuff, like 2 of Keaton's MGM talkies slid into the public domain, parlor, bedroom, and bath. So that's on here, and it's a good print and all. And this also has at least one of Keaton's shorts on here. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge. But yeah, this thing has drifted in and out of print, and the price has gone up and down like a yo-yo. But if you can get it at a good time and you're a fan, definitely pick it up. Given the restrictions of all this, it was done very well. So I have been pretty slack with Keaton on Blu-ray. I've got that Criterion copy of The Cameraman and By Turn Spite Marriage. And I've got this, 7 Chances, and that's it. But I mentioned when I was going over the Laserdiscs that the opening scene of this movie was shot in 2-strip Technicolor. And unfortunately, on pretty much every copy of 7 Chances prior to this Blu-ray, it's faded orange. There's very little discernible, unique color to it. Now, there really is no contextual reason for that scene to be in color at all. But for this, I believe they found another, I'd have to watch, there's a whole mini documentary on it, but they found another copy of it and they composited a bunch of existing stuff and they artificially built up the color back up to, I think, half or so would be about right. So it has enough discernible color now. And I was going to go over that when I did my recent early color film episode, but there was so much going on in it that I just didn't want to get into Technicolor. But that was really the main reason I picked this one up. I'd heard that they finally really got the color down for that opening scene. And it's, well, of course, I hate to say it's definitive, but it's the best yet. Only time will tell if it ever gets any better. But if it never does, I'd say it's plenty good. And unfortunately, I think this is out of print now. This can't be that old. Well, 2011. So unfortunately, this is probably a little tougher to come by now. But it's a very well done set. I'd have to go over it again. But I remember it had some good features, especially the bit on the Technicolor. And it also, I mentioned the plot of this one earlier. It's such a basic plot that they included the Three Stooges short Brideless Groom, which is one of the 4 that slid into the public domain. And 7 Chances in and of itself is based on a play from, I think, the late 19th or early 20th century. So that whole stereotype about the inheritance and all the goofy stuff you have to go through and the super contrived plot and all, but it works. And in Keaton's case, it just was a springboard for a bunch of really good gags. But anyway, that's all I got. Hopefully I did a little justice to Buster here. Not that too many people care about that stuff, but whatever. That's it for me for today. I'll talk to you again soon.